welcome. Week 6. It's been a month and a half now since we first started learning TouchDesigner, and this is everything that we have covered up until now, minus a few other things which we're going to run through today that we covered for week 6. So let's get right into it. There was an original piece and 2 tutorials. So I'm probably gonna go through the tutorials first and then show that original piece at the end. This should be a slightly more interesting video since we're not really doing a course, because I feel like with the courses it's kind of boring to run through because it's very dense and the outputs are not terribly interesting. So the first tutorial that we went through is this one, and the quality is horrific at the moment, by Okamirufu. I always suck at pronouncing that, but this guy is a legend and he does heaps of really detailed, intricate tutorials. Yeah, they're really good, and I find myself constantly coming back. On that note, actually, I think I will add a playlist of all the tutorials that I have covered. So yeah, for the first one, it's a pops tutorial, and we are working with text, which I just really wanted to see how text works with pops. If I open the file here, you can see a custom text. This is what the node structure looks like, and the first thing you'll notice is annotations, which I finally learned how to do, and it makes the file look much cleaner. Literally all you do is hold Alt, drag, and then you have an annotation. So this is what it looks like. You'll notice it's sort of bunching on the edges there. I think it's just a resolution issue there, or at least, yeah, it's got some bounding box in it. But the way this works is we have a slider. This slider controls a line, and as I move that slider across, you'll see it starts applying noise to the right of that line. So how does this actually work? Well, we input a top text because there is no pop text. If I was to go into the pops here, you'll see, I'll type in text, there is texture math, but there is no text. So we need to create that text using a top operator. So it's pixel based, converted it to pop, and then we've used a transform and a delete to remove that black background. Then we've created a particle generator, and then we have a group, and the best way I understand the group is that it's where we map the slider. Then we have noise, pretty self-explanatory, to create more noise movement, the null, and then a random. So we use a box and a random in a copy, and I believe that just creates a lot more of that 3D spaced movement. As you can see, the random applies to the X, Y, and Z coordinates there. Put it through a pretty standard render sequence using a PBR for the main pop that we have rendering there. And then we have some screen space ambient for some post-processing. And that's about it. So we have this pretty nice interactive scene. I didn't really try and make modifications to this one. Probably the most valuable thing is this here, how we can bring a text into a SOP and then play around with it. That's the first one. So the second one by Axiom was quite interesting, and this was looking at creating a morphing animation. And it's also a pops, which is nice for us because that's what we're trying to learn more of, the new family. This is what the node structure looks like. It looks a little bit more complicated, but I think it's actually simpler. Yes, even looking at that, I still think it is a little bit simpler. Okay, maybe this top section is a little bit iffy. I also forgot to annotate this one, but that's okay because it's all quite sectioned anyway. Let's show the output first. Set this to view. We'll see we've created this nice morphing animation. So we have this point cloud and it's morphing across different shapes, and it's pretty cool how this is actually done. So I've put a text here. This is my own notes on the project, but essentially what we've done is we've created these shapes. We've fed into the constant the amount of points that we want, and this is important because of this blend pop. So what the blend does is it allows us to, I see it as like a switch operator, and it allows us to blend in between pops. However, the pops need to have the same amount of points. So you can't have a pop with 1,000 points and another with 50 and blend between them. So that is a limiter. It does make it a little bit tricky because you need to, for each different shape, figure out a way to get to the same number of points, and there's not just a single operator which does this for you. So I was trying to do this with text and I couldn't figure it out, but with shapes it's a little bit like you can set columns and rows and it'll calculate the number of points quite accurately there, but using text or a custom shape it's actually a bit harder to do that. This chop sequence up here is using a timer. We're delaying that and then feeding it through a blend to cycle through those different inputs that we have. So the blend input here acts as a switch for each blend input. Each of these is fed from, as you can see, the S-curve one feeds the first, and then we have a delay on that S-curve, and delay 2 and delay 3 for each of these modes. Further from that, we create a copy and we instance a circle according to the blend shape, and then we use a lookup and a ramp to add a little bit of color, feed that null into a render sequence with a simple constant texture. I've used a circle to create a camera path, although you could just add like an abs time on the rotate parameter here of the geo and you would actually get the same effect, and it would be a little bit simpler. It's only in very specific situations that you would use a camera path instead. I just sort of wanted to do it to remind myself how it was done. We have a simple light setup and render it out. Use a lookup here with a ramp just to get that background. And there we go. A very simple, but I think potentially powerful effect where we blend between different pops. And the goal for next week is to figure out how to actually do this with text. Now we move on to the first original. Yeah, so finally here we move on to the first original piece, the first original thing I've made in TouchDesigner purely on my own. Are you ready? Damn. So yeah, that's it there. You're gonna have to forgive me for this strange looking node structure with all these lights up here. But let me actually bring out that null here. Full screen it, there you go. So I'm gonna run through how I made this. Originally, I wanted to make something like this, where it was sort of a grid of cubes, flat, and then just have the noise along the cubes and just leave it at that. But I sort of got a bit carried away and decided to just make multiple ones and then play around with lights and everything as well. And I'm glad I did because it makes this really cool image. I'm pretty happy with this one. So if I switch to the geometry viewer here, this is what the scene actually looks like. We have one grid on top, one on the bottom. We have a light at the back there, and I think it's set to, it's a distant light. And then we have a number of lights within a cube texture. And that's because TouchDesigner doesn't have a specific way to create a light emitting texture. So you have to kind of cheat your way through it. What I managed to figure out is that you can put a light inside of an object and it will make it look like that object is glowing. As you can see here. Let's start at the beginning of this project. Okay, so at the core of this project is a grid. This is actually a SOP grid, which we then feed through a noise, and you can see here I've set this noise to very low amplitude and period as well, and we just get this slight rippling. Then we feed it into a null and we instance in the geo here. So in this instance I've instanced null2, connected this box to the geo, and now we translate across the P0, 1 and 2. What that allows us to do, if I can zoom into this just to illustrate, that looks terrible. Okay, here we go. So I set it to gray just to show you what we are kind of looking at here. And you can see I've sort of created these boxes according to the parameters of that grid. And because there is noise already applied to that grid, it's now applying that noise across the boxes. Wow, it even looks cooler like that actually. That looks kind of sick. Yeah, I mean, this is the cool thing about TouchDesigner is you can just do something random and if it ends up looking cool. But yeah, what we've done is we've created that geometry using a grid, applying noise to it, and instancing a box across the coordinates of that grid. It bases it off the rows and columns and size as well. Now for the third piece of geometry which we included, it's quite literally just a rectangle, and we've added a Phong texture, used these settings you can see here, and then we've just put lights inside. I put a whole bunch of lights in because if you just use one light, it's only going to emit according to that light. With just one light active, you can see how it only emits from that texture where the light is. So if I now add all those lights, you can see it's actually emitting down, and it looks more like the entire material is emitting light. This all feeds into the render sequence, no special effects here. This light is all the way out there. We've set it to a distant light, and it's also feeding us a red light. One thing to note about these lights up here is that we've played around with the attenuation settings, and this distance attenuated so that this has been turned on for those lights up here, and it's because I wanted to get more of a glowing effect as opposed to like a normal light. And I think the attenuation affects how far that light spreads. But you'll see in post we've used bloom and luma blur to enhance that glowing effect. A luma blur, this is a trick that I picked up from one of the tutorials that I watched. As you can see in the final render, it's kind of blurry on the ceiling, and this is not because of distance, it's because we've actually added a blur specifically to that part of the screen. And similarly, we've also added a bit more blur down here, and it almost looks like a camera effect. It's a cheeky way to add that without actually adding any camera blur. That's the first original project. So I can safely tick those 3 off. We didn't get through a third tutorial in week 6, but that'll just be for week 7 now. The next week we're going to keep it simple, and we're just going to do 3 tutorials. This is purely based on personal time constraints. To be honest, I think creating original pieces is the best way to learn. And so as soon as I can get back to doing that, it's going to be a main focus. You learn so much when you just mess around, and I'm like searching up, troubleshooting how to do things. And that's really just the best way to learn. As long as you're constantly doing something and learning and moving forward, that's the most important thing. So yeah, anyways, that wraps up week 6. Stay dedicated.